In this video, we're going to create a CRUD with Angular and ASP.NET Core. The idea is the following. We're going to be able to create, read, update, and delete records in a real database in SQL Server. For that, we're going to use ASP.NET Core and also Entity Framework Core. And in the front end with Angular, we're going to use routing so that we can have several pages in our application. And also, we're going to build forms using reactive forms. If you want to learn more about Angular and ASP.NET Core and building applications with these two technologies, buy my Udemy course today, where we will learn to build this kind of applications from scratch, and in the end we're going to deploy both of them into production. Link with a discount in the description of this video. Alright, so let's get started. Alright, so here we are. Remember that in the previous video we created our Angular application, our ASP.NET Core Web API application, and we configured them so that they can communicate with each other. Now in this video, as I mentioned before, we're going to create a CRUD. So we're going to have to create some screens here in our Angular application so that our users can see the list of laptops. We're going to build a laptop store. So our users should be able to see a list of laptops, create a laptop, update a laptop, and delete a laptop. And for that we need many screens. So the first thing that I want us to do is to build a menu. And for that we're going to use a component from Angular Material. Angular Material is a library that offers us many components already built in that we can reuse. That makes our life easier. So let's come to Visual Studio Code and let's create that. And let's install Angular Material. Let me open a terminal. I can do it from here, Ctrl+T, or I can simply say terminal new terminal and it is the same. And notice that I have two terminals open, one that has my Angular application running and the other one has nothing in it, and that will allow me to write commands. So here I will say ng add Angular Material, enter, and with this we're going to be installing Angular Material in our application. I will just leave the default options, so enter, enter again, enter, enter. And that's it, we have Angular Material installed in our application. So as you can see here, we have updated the Angular JSON, and that means that we have to come here to this tab. Let me Ctrl+C to stop running my application and run it again, because when we update the Angular JSON, we must re-execute our application so that those changes take effect. Alright, so here we are. Let me close this. So here I have the documentation from Angular Material. We can come to Material Angular IO because I want to come to component, and I want to show you that what we're going to do is that we're going to use a already built-in component here that is called Toolbar. And here in Toolbar you can, for example, come here and see the code and see how to use it. This is basically what we're going to do. We're going to first create a component that is going to have this toolbar, and then we're going to import some elements like Mat Toolbar module and Mat Button module that comes from these places. So I just wanted you to know that you can come here and see for yourself the different examples of the different components that Angular Material have for us. So let's come back here, and as I was saying, I want to create a new component, so let's come here, and in order to generate a new component, I can use the Angular CLI. I can say ng generate component menu, enter, and that will generate a menu component. And as you can see, this has been done, so I can Ctrl-click here and Ctrl-click here to open these two files, the HTML and also the TS, the class of the component, so that now I can come here, and as you can see, here we have these imports, as I mentioned before. I can come here and just copy this because we are going to basically do the same example. I can paste this here, and let's come back here so that we can copy from where I can import these modules. So let me paste this here, and as you can see, now this works. Now let me use the component here. Let me say Mat Toolbar. Here I want to put a span, an anchor. I will use a Mat Button, and in here I will say laptops store, and I want to also use an icon. So I can say Mat icon. So what are the icons that we have at our disposal? For that we can come to fonts.google.icon/icons, and in here I can look for whatever icon I want to use. Let me say laptop, for example, and as you can see we have these laptop windows. I can use this one. So let's come back here, and I have to write here laptop windows, And now let's see how we're doing. First, I need to use this menu component in our app component. So let's come back to the app component, which we saw before when we were doing our test of communication between Angular and ASP.NET Core. I will put it here at the top of my application. So I can say here app menu, and let me say control dot here to import the menu component. And we can see that here we have menu component because we imported into our app component. Now let's say Control KS to save everything. And let's come here and let's come to my Angular app. And as you can see here, I have here at the top my menu. But of course, right now it is not doing anything. I want to have here another menu option so that I can navigate to a page that is going to have the list of laptops that my store is selling. So let's do that. Let's come here and let's come here to the menu component. And in here, I will say anchor, again, mat button to use Angular material styling for buttons. And I will say here products. So I can save, and now we will have here two options. But of course, if I click on here, nothing happens. The thing is that we must configure routing in our application. Routing in Angular basically refers to having a route and a component that belongs to that route. That is, for example, if we are here at the root of our application, I want to display this page that we have here. But if I go to products and we have, for example, /products, let's say products here, then I want to come to a component that will have a list of laptops or a list of products in general to display to the user. So that is a route in Angular, a URL and a component. So let's configure that. Let's come here, and in order to configure routing in Angular, we come to this app routes file that was created by default. And as you can see here, we have an array of routes. So here I can define as many routes as I want. Now, as I was mentioning, I am basically going to indicate a path and a component. But for that, we have to have components to display. So I want to create two components. One component, which will be some sort of landing page component that will display the main page of our application, and another component for having a list of products. So let me create those two components, control backtick to open the terminal, and let me say here ng generate component. I'll say landing for the landing page, enter. And also let me say here ng generate component. I can put it in a folder, so products/products list, enter. And now we have these two components. So what I want to do is to come here, create an object that is going to have a path. This one is going to be for the root, which is going to be the component. And I can get the name of the component here in the TS file. So for example, control click here, landing component, so I can copy this and paste that here, control dot, so I can import the landing component from the file in which it is in. Alright, add import from, and let's do the same for path, products, component, product, list component. And let me close this, by the way. And as you can see, we have these two routes here. Now, in order to be able to navigate to these routes, we have to come to our menu component, but to the class of the component, because I have to import a router link, which is a functionality that allows me to navigate in my Angular application using Angular's router. So let's come here. Now we can say here, router link empty, because if we click here, we expect to go to the root of our application. And in here, I can say router link products, because if we click on products, we expect to go to the products path. Alright, so finally, in order for me to be able to test this, I have to come to the app component, because I need to indicate where in our page I want to display the landing component or my product list component. And for that, we can use a special component that will display the corresponding component from the route. So let's come here and let's come to our app component. Let's make sure first, let's come to the app component TS. Let's make sure that we are importing router outlet, which is the special component that will allow us to display the component that is configured here in the routes. Alright, so we have that here. Therefore, we can come to the HTML. And for example, let me put it here below my app menu. Let me say here router outlet. And that's it. With this, we can press Ctrl-KS to save everything, and let's come here. And now let's see that. Let me delete this from here and let me press enter. And now as you can see, we have landing works, which is the default text for a new component that is called landing. And if we come to products, we have product list works, which means that indeed we are changing dynamically the content that is here in this router outlet depending on in which route we are in. Now, of course, whatever is outside of this router outlet is constant. For example, this app menu is going to be constant for every page in our application, which is what we want. But what we don't want is to have this constant in our application, because let's say that we want to have this in the landing page component. So let me cut this, Ctrl P, landing, HTML, and let me paste this here. And as you can see, I have to copy also the content that we have in the app component TS, which is the one that has this property, weather forecast. I can delete this title, by the way. Let me then cut this from here, and let's come to the landing component TS, and let me paste this here, and let me control dot here to add all missing imports. And as you can see, now this works. There are no errors here. And if I press Ctrl-KS, we're going to see that now we only have this content. We only have this content when we click on here. If we click on here, we have the product list works. Alright, so here in this page, I want to display the list of laptops that we have in our database. But we don't have a database yet. Therefore, that is what we're going to work on now. We're going to create a CRUD in our web API. So for that, we're going to come to Visual Studio, not Visual Studio Code, but Visual Studio. And in here, we're going to install first Entity Framework Core. With Entity Framework Core, we can, from C# code, create a new database, interact with that database, and that is that we can read data from it, we can insert data, update data, and also delete data. And again, all using C# code. So let's do that. Let's come to the Solution Explorer. I want to install Entity Framework Core first, so let me right click on here. Let me go to Manage NuGet Packages. Let's come to Browse, and I want to write here the name of the package that I want to install, which is Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server. In my case, I want to use Entity Framework Core with SQL Server. In your case, if you want to, you can use SQLite, you can use MySQL, you can use Postgres, etc. In my case, I prefer to use SQL Server, so that is what I'm going to be using. Alright, so I can install here, accept. Besides this, I want to install, because I am using Visual Studio, there is a package that I want to install that is called Microsoft Entity Framework Core Tools. If you are not using Visual Studio, do not install this package. If, for example, you are using Visual Studio Code for developing your ASP.NET Core application, only install this one, Microsoft Entity Framework Core Design. Whether you're using Visual Studio Code or whatever other code editor, use Design. But for those who are using Visual Studio, like me, you have to install Microsoft Entity Framework Core Tools, which will allow you to run commands of Entity Framework Core here in Visual Studio. So let me install this, accept. Alright, so this is done. Now I can close this. Let's come here. Let me right click on here because I want to create a new class. Let me say class here. I'll call it Application DB Context. Application DB Context. Enter. The DB Context is basically the central piece of Entity Framework Core because it is the class that allows us to make the main configurations. For example, what are the tables that we're going to have in our database? What is the configuration of Entity Framework Core? Like, are we going to use SQL Server or Oracle or whatever? And so on and so forth. So let me say here, DB Context. Let me tap here, Control dot, generate constructor with options. And through these options is that we're going to pass the main configuration, like the connection string that we're going to use. And speaking of connection strings, let's build our connection string. So let's come here. I want to use a configuration provider, like App Settings Development JSON. Let's come here. Let me say connection strings. Let me say here default connection. And here I will write server. And I need to write here the location or the name of my server. In my case, if I come to SQL Server Management Studio and I right click here and go to properties, we're going to be able to get the name of our server, which in my case is this one. So let me just say OK, and let's come here and let me paste this here. semicolon, database. What is going to be the name of my database? Again, in my case, I want to create a database from scratch, so I have to write here the name that I want the database to have. So I will say laptops store YouTube, semicolon, integrated security equal to true, because we want to use our Windows credential to authenticate in our SQL Server instance. And finally, trust server certificate to indicate that we want to relax the security rules with regard to the communication between our application and SQL Server. Now, remember that here we are in development, and therefore I can trust my own SQL Server instance. We don't use this in production, so don't worry about it. We're only going to be using this in development. Alright, so now this is done. Now let's come to the program class, because I want to configure my application DB context as a service. So let me, above this bar up, I want to write the following. I want to say builder services at DB context, application DB context, and here I will pass options, and let me say here options.use SQL Server, and inside of use SQL Server I will pass the name of my connection string, and the name is, and let me come here just to not make a silly mistake, let me say here default connection, semicolon here, and this is it. With this we have configured the application DB context. Now I need to indicate what is going to be the tables of my database. So as I was saying before, we're building a laptop store, so I want to create a laptop class that will represent a table or a record in my database. So let me come here and I will create an entities folder. An entity is basically a class that represents a table in a database. So entities, right click, add class, I'll call it laptop, and in here I can have as many properties as I want. For example, I can have an ID property, which is going to be the unique identifier of the laptop of a specific record, and also we can give a laptop a name. So required string name, the name of the laptop. Now we're going to deal with validations later in this course. For now we're going to keep it simple, and we're just going to create a laptop with two properties, ID and name. So now, in order to configure this laptop class as an entity, I have to come to the application DB context, because remember that I said that here is where we configure what tables our database is going to have. Therefore, I have to come here and create a new property, prop. Let me say DB set of type laptop, and let me import entities, and let me say here laptops. Alright, so what did we do here? We're saying that we want to create a table based on the structure of the laptop class. So it's going to be a table that will have two columns, ID and name, and also the name of that table is going to be laptops. So this is how we can configure a class to be an entity. So now let's come to the Package Manager console, and if you don't have it here, you can always come to Tools, NuGet Package Manager console, and in here I can write a command that will allow me to create a migration. A migration in Entity Framework Core is basically like a step in between modifying my C# application or ASP.NET Core application and modify my database. In the migration, we're basically going to have C# code that is going to describe what changes are going to occur in our database. Let's see that. Let me say add migration. We're going to add a new migration. We have to give it a name. We can say laptops table, enter. Alright, so here we have our migration. As you can see, it is a simple class. And as you can see, we have here this create table function, which means that we're going to create a table. We haven't done so yet. We're saying that when we apply this migration, which we're going to do in a minute, then we're going to create a table. The name of that table is going to be laptops. The columns are going to be ID and name. And we're going to have a primary key, which is the ID column. Alright, so let me say Package Manager console, update database, which, as you may imagine, this command allows us to apply the migrations in our database. Since we don't have a database created yet, what this is going to do is that it is going to create that database. Alright, so this is done. Let's come to SQL Server Management Studio, right click on here, refresh, and let's look for the laptops store YouTube database here. And as you can see, if we come to tables, we're going to see that we have our laptops table here, and inside of laptops we can see that we have the columns ID and name. Excellent. So now that we have our database, we're ready to do our CRUD in the Web API. So let's come here and let me create a controller. Remember that a controller allows us to handle HTTP requests to our application. And the idea is that with a controller, I can centralize the operations, for example, for an entity or for a resource in general. So that we can have a laptops controller, so that the operations of reading, creating, updating, and deleting laptops are contained here in this controller. So let me come here and let me say that I want to inherit from controller base. And let me say here route. And let me say API/laptops, which is going to be the path for us to access this controller. And let me say here also API controller. Alright, because this controller is for APIs. Alright, so CTOR, because I want to have a constructor here, because I want to use dependency injection to get a hold of an instance of the application DB context. So context control dot, let me say create and assign field context so that we have access to this instance throughout my class. Alright, so we're going to create a few methods, a few actions. So let me say here HTTP get, and let me say here public async. We're going to use asynchronous programming because it is best practice to always use asynchronous programming when we're communicating with a database. So let me say here task of list of laptop, because this method will allow us to get all of the laptops in my database. So let me say here get return await. We have to use the await operator so that we can use asynchronous programming. Let me say context laptops to list async. We're going to use not to list but to list async to use the asynchronous version. And with this we're doing a get and getting all of the records in the laptops table. Now let's do the same for HTTP get but for ID. This is going to be important when we want to update a record. And by the way, we're saying here that we want to receive the ID in the URL and that the data type of that ID is going to be integer. And please be careful, do not put a space here because that is going to throw an exception. So let me say here public async task action result of laptop is going to be a single laptop. Let me say here get, we're going to receive an ID. And now let me say here var laptop equal to await context laptop. Let's come to laptops and let me say first or default async, and in here I want to get the laptop that has the ID that I'm receiving as a parameter here. Now if this returns null, it means that there was no laptop with that ID, and therefore I have to return a 404 in that scenario. So laptop is null. If laptop is null, then I want to return a not found, a 404 not found. Otherwise, I'm simply going to return the laptop. So laptop. Alright, now let's come to here and let me say HTTP post, because I want to be able to create a laptop, public async task created at route result post, and we're going to receive here from body. We're going to say from body because we have to specify from where we're getting the information of the laptop. In this case, it is from the body of the HTTP request. Therefore, let me say here laptop, and then now I can say context at laptop. Now you may be wondering, why am I not saying await here? That is because this add is actually, and let me move this down for a moment, this add is not actually inserting anything in the laptops table. What it's doing is that it is marking this object as to be added in the future. Think of it like a document that you are modifying, like this one. As you can see here, we have an asterisk here indicating that this document has been modified, but we still haven't saved changes. It is until we say, for example, Ctrl S to save changes, that this disappears. And of course, if I make a change now, like write a space here, we're going to get back this asterisk, indicating that although yes, we have modified this document, we still haven't saved changes. That is the same that happens here. We're saying that we want to modify this laptop so that it is inserted into our laptops table, but that still haven't happened because we have to actually save changes. And in that save changes is that we use await, because actually saving changes goes to the database and in this case inserts the laptop. So we say await context save changes async. Alright, and as you can see with this, I am actually saving the laptop in the database. Now, it is a good practice in a web API to return where we can find the newly created entity. So we're going to say here, return created at route. And here, as you can see, we have to pass the route name. So let me put a name here to this route. Let me say here, name, get laptop by ID. Let me copy this and let me paste this here. And now also I need to indicate that we have to pass an ID here. So let me say here, new ID equal to laptop ID. Alright, and comma, finally, the laptop that was created. Alright, and with this is good. Now let's work with update. I want to be able to update a laptop, so put, let me indicate the ID of the laptop that I want to update. And let me say here, public async task. I can use action result in this case. Put int ID, the ID that we get in the URL, and also from body, the laptop. So laptop, and let me say here, var laptop exists. I need to make sure that there is indeed a laptop with this ID. Therefore, let me say here, await, I have to go to the table, laptops, to get that information. So context, laptops, any async. I'm asking, is there any laptop with this characteristic? ID is equal to ID. If this is false, it means that there is no laptop with that ID, and therefore we only have to return a not found. Otherwise, if this is true, then it means that such a laptop exists. So let me say here, laptop ID equal to ID, because we're not going to be receiving the ID of the laptop here, but from the URL. And then let me say context, update, and let me pass the laptop. Again, just like we did with add, this is simply marking this object as to be updated, but it is not actually doing so. It will do it when we say await, context, save changes async. It is the standard from a pod method in a web API to return no content if it is successful. So no content here, which is a 204 by the way. And finally, we have delete. So HTTP delete, we only need the ID of an entity to delete it. So I'll just have here delete and then public async task action result delete. And let me say here int ID. And then I'm going to explain you this code in a minute. Let me just write it first. So let me say records deleted equal to await context laptops where I want to filter. I want to get the laptops that have the ID equal to ID, and then I want to execute a, and let me say here 2 equals, and then I want to execute a delete command, execute delete async. If records deleted is equal to 0, then I want to return a not found. Otherwise, if it was successful, I will simply return a no content. Now, what are we doing here? What I'm doing here is that I'm saying, go to the laptops table, get me all of the laptops that have this ID, and delete them. And this method returns the amount of records that were deleted. So this is an integer. So when we say execute delete, two things could happen. It could return 0, which means that no laptop was deleted. And why would that be? Well, for example, that can happen because there is no laptop with this ID that we have here. And therefore, if this is 0, it means that no such laptop exists, and therefore we have to return a not found because there is no a single laptop with this ID. Now, if this is different than 0, for example, if it is 1, then it means that indeed a laptop was deleted, and therefore this operation was successful, and so we can return a 204 no content, which is basically success. Alright, so we are done here. Control F5. Let me run my application. So we are going to be able to come here. As you can see, we have our API here. Let me come to API/laptops, enter. And as you can see, this is empty, of course, because we haven't created any laptops yet. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to come to our Angular application and we're going to create a form that will allow us to create laptops and also a list of laptops so that we can visualize them. So let's get to work on that. Let's come to Visual Studio Code, And first I need that component for creating laptops. So let me say control backtick. Let's come here, ng generate component products slash. I can write products create, for example. We can use this nomenclature. Enter. So we're going to have a products create component in the products folder. Alright, so let's come to routes. I want to come to routes because I want to configure this route. So path products create, and the component is going to be the products create component. Alright. So now let me open my HTML and the TS and let's get to work. Alright, so I want to use what is known as a reactive form. Reactive forms allows us to configure forms using JavaScript code. I prefer that over template-driven forms. So in this course, we're going to be using reactive forms exclusively. So let's come here and let me say reactive forms module because we need to import this in order to be able to create a form. Now, also, besides this, I need to use what is known as a form builder that, as its name implies, is going to allow us to build forms. So read-only form builder equal to inject. I want to use dependency injection here in Angular. So form builder semicolon. I want to create a property form that is going to contain our form. So let me say group. And here we can have as many controls or properties of our form. In our case, we remember that for a laptop, we only have a name for now. In the future, we're going to have RAM, the hard drive, and so on. For now, we're going to keep things simple. We're just going to say name, and the default value of this control is going to be an empty string. Again, in the future, we're going to deal with validations. For now, we just want to have this done. Alright, so now with this, I can come to the HTML of my component. Let me come here and say h2. Let me say create laptop for the title. Let me say here form. And I want to say here that if the user submits this form, I want to execute a function. So let me say here function save changes. And for now, this is not going to do anything, but only display on the console this form value, which will allow me to get all of the information that the user has put in the form. Alright, so let's come here and let me say here save changes. And in here, I want to connect my form that I have here with the form that I created over here with this form. Alright, so now I can create a fields. So I will use a component called MathFormField that allows us to have fields in the style of Angular material. So I need to import that. So let's come here to products create. Let me say here MathFormField module and also MathInput. And let me also say MathButton module because we're going to have two buttons in this component. Alright, so now let's come here and let me say MathFormField. I will use appearance outline because it is the one that I like. Again, you can see all of the options in the official documentation of Angular material. So let me say here math label. I'll say name for the name of the laptop. And after that, I will say input, the actual input type text. And let me say here math input. And I need to connect this input here with this property that I have here with this name, so that when I write something into that input type text, we're going to get that information here in this name. So let's come here and let me say here form control equal to form controls name. Alright, this is great. So now let me say here div, and I want to say button type submit of type math_flat_button. Let me use the math_flat_button design. And let me say here save changes. And also another button for cancel. So let me say math_stroke_button. And I want to use router link here. So router link. And I want to help the user navigate to products. Alright, so now let's come here because I need to import, of course, router link to be able to use it. Alright, that is great. Now I need to add some space in between these two buttons. So let me say in the CSS of this component, let's come to the CSS file and let me say, for example, anchor margin left 1 rem. Alright, so I think we're ready to make a test. So let's come to the product list component, and I want to add here H2 laptops, and then in here I want to say anchor, create a new laptop, and in here I want to use a router link, and I want to say products create, and also a mat flat button. Now I need to import the mat button module and also the router link. So let's come here and let me say here mat button module and the router link. Alright, Control KS, and let's see how we're doing. Let's come here. As you can see, we are here in products, and by the way, I see that we don't have a margin here. Let me do that right away because I don't like that. So let's come to the app component. I want to add some margin. So since that margin is going to be constant in my whole application, I want to put it here in the app component. So let me say here div, and inside of this, I will put that router outlet, and then I will say class container, and then let's come to the app CSS, to the app component CSS, so that I can say here container, and what I want to do is to say margin 0 and 100 pixels. Alright, Control KS, let's come here, and now let's see that we have an acceptable margin, and that margin is of course in both pages. Alright, so if I click on create a new laptop, and if I click on here, this doesn't work because I forgot to put here a slash, and also, now that I think about it, I also forgot to put that here in the product create component, we have to put here a slash so that it goes to the beginning of the URL. So Control KS, hopefully that was it. Click on here, as you can see it works, cancel, it works. Alright, so now if I say here, for example, Asus, and Asus laptop, let me press F12, and as you can see here on the console, if I click on Save Changes, you can see that we have name equal to Asus. Excellent, our form is working. Alright, so now I actually need to push this into my SQL Core application so that this laptop gets actually created. So for that, we're going to use a service. Remember that in Angular, a service is a class that we can reuse throughout our whole application. And that is especially useful when communicating with a web API, because we can then abstract the communication layer from our component into reusable parts that are those services. So let me open this. Let me say here ng generate service. I will put it in products, and I will just name it products. Alright, enter. Alright, so as you can see, we have this here. Remember that we already did a service before, the weather forecast service, in which what we did was to get a hold of an instance of the HTTP client, and then using the environment file, we get the URL of our web API, and then with that information, we were able to do HTTP requests. We're basically going to do the same, so let me just copy this, and let's come to the products service file, so product service. Let me just paste this here, and I want to control dot here, add all missing imports, but here I will say API/laptops, because remember that here in the route attribute here, I put API laptops, and that is what we have here, API laptops. So now let me create a new function, so public create, and what do I want to receive here? I want to receive a laptop, but we don't have a laptop type yet in our Angular application. Therefore, what we're going to do is that we're going to create an interface for that. So let's come here, and inside of products, I will right click new file, and I will say products.models.ts, and in here I will create an interface, and I will say laptop creation. I say laptop creation because this is a special type that we're only going to be using when dealing with creating a laptop or updating a laptop. And this is only going to have a name, of course, because when we want to create a laptop, we only want to have the name of the laptop. We don't need to indicate the ID because that is done by SQL Server. And let's not forget to say here export to actually export this. Now let's come here, and I want to create a laptop of type laptop creation, and then in here I will say return this HTTP post, and here I will pass the URL, so this API URL, and also I want to pass the laptop, semicolon here. Alright, so now we want to use this in our products create component. So let's come to products create, and let me say here products service equal to inject products service, and let's come here, and instead of doing this, what I will do is that I will say const laptop equal to this form value as laptop creation so that we can cast it. And then we're going to say this product service create, let's pass the laptop dot subscribe to execute that HTTP request, and then I want to redirect the user to the products path. So let me say here I need to use a router service to allow the user to navigate. So inject router semicolon, and then in here I will say this router navigate, and I can say here products, so that when the user creates a new laptop, they get redirected to the products path. Alright, this should be it. So let me say Ctrl+KS to save everything, and let's come here. And let's see that here I can say, for example, Asus SSD 1TB, for example, save changes. Alright, and as you can see, we are here. And although we don't see anything, we can come to the database. And let's come to laptops, right click on it, select top 1000 rows. And let's see that indeed we have here Asus SSD 1TB. Excellent. So now that we have a laptop, I want to be able to see it here. So let's come to Visual Studio Code. I want to come to my product service. So let's come to products service, and I want to create a new function that is going to allow us to get a list of laptops from our web API. So let me say here get all, and let me say here that we're going to return an observable of type laptop, but we don't have a laptop type yet because what we have is a laptop creation. But remember that we want to get the ID of the laptop and also the name. So let's come to products models, and let me say here export interface laptop, and let me say ID number, and then name string. Alright, now let's come here and Control here to import that new type. Let me come here and say this, and then let's say return this HTTP get, and let me say laptop array, and then let me pass here the URL. So let me say here this API URL. Alright, so now we can come to the products list component. So product list component, let's inject here our products service equal to inject products service semicolon, and now what I want to do is that I want to have here a constructor because I want to invoke that getAll method. So let's come here and let me say this product service getAll subscribe, and we're going to get here a list of laptops or an array of laptops, and then I want to put that here in a property. So let me say here laptops, which can be undefined, and let me say here laptop array. Alright, semicolon, and now I can say these laptops equal to laptops. So the array of laptops from the web API will be assigned here to this laptops property that we have here. Now, in order to display the list of laptops, we're going to use a component from Angular material called MathTable, which will allow us to display a list of elements with the styling of Angular material. Now, this is not mandatory. Certainly, in the future, we're going to have another way of displaying a list of laptops, but for now, just to keep things simple, let's use the MathTable. So let me say here, MathTable module, and let's come here, and something that we need in order to be able to use MathTable is to indicate here what are going to be the columns of the MathTable. We're going to have two columns, the name column for the name of the laptop, and also an actions column to indicate what actions the user can do to the laptop. For example, can they edit them, can they delete them, and so on. So let's come here and let me say columns to display equal to name for the name column and actions for the actions column. Alright, so now let's come to the product list component HTML, and let's say here table, and let's say here math table data source laptops, and we're going to see that we have an error here because this cannot be undefined. Therefore, we can say if laptops, which means that only run this code if laptops is not undefined. Alright, So now let me say here class math elevation C8, which will give some design to our table. Now in here, in order to indicate our columns, we have to say ng container, and then in here I can say math column definition name, and of course this name comes from this name value that I have here. Also, let's do the same for actions. So let me just copy this and say that here actions. So we're going to have two columns. Alright, so inside of here I can indicate the title of this column, which is going to be name. Now I need to say here math header cell. This is some configuration that we have to do. Math header cell definition or def. Alright, so after that we can say td. This is for the data. This was for the header and this is for the data. So math cell and then math cell definition, and in here I can say let laptop, and through this laptop variable I can access the laptop. So I can say here laptop name. Alright, now I want to do the same here, so I can just copy this and paste it here, but here it will be actions, and in here instead of having a simple value, we're going to have two buttons. We're going to say here anchor for editing, so edit. Let's say here math flat button, and then rather link slash products slash edit slash laptop ID. We're going to deal with this in just a minute. For now, let's just put this. As you can see here, we're going to have a URL like products slash edit slash 1 or 2 or 5 or whatever, depending on what value those laptop.id has. And also, let me say here button delete. This is for deletion, of course. Math flat button color worn, and then after this ng container, there is some more configuration that we have to do. So the rows of the header, math header row definition, and I have to pass here the columns to display property that we created in the class of the component, and also the definition of the rows for the data. So math row definition equal to let row and columns to display. Alright, so we can see what we have. Ctrl+K+S to save everything, and let's come here. Alright, so as you can see we have Asus SSD 1TB, and I can create a new one like MSI 512GB HDD for example, save changes, and as you can see we have these two laptops. Of course, we need to add some space here and some space here, so let's do that right away. I like to put here a name like index elements, so let's do that. And now let me copy this. Let's come to the CSS of this component, to the product list component CSS, and let me say this here, and I want to say margin top 1 rem, and also index elements, and only for the anchor that is inside of it, I want to say margin right 1 rem. So margin right for the anchor and margin top for the whole table. Alright, so Ctrl+K+S, let's come here and let's see that indeed we have some spacing here. Alright, so now we're able to create and read laptops. Now we want to edit and delete them. So let's get to work on that. So as you saw, what we did here was to create a new URL for products, edit, and a number. Now we need to figure out how to actually configure that in routing. Let's see that. Let's come here. Let me say Ctrl+P, app routes. And what we have to do in order to have variables in the URL is to say path, in this case products, edit slash colon ID. In this case colon, indicating that this is going to be a variable, and ID is going to be basically the name of that variable. And that's actually it. Now after that I have to put the name of my component. Of course, we don't have a component for this, so let me open the terminal and let me say ng generate component products edit. Enter. The component has been created, and now I can say here component products edit component. Alright, so now I want to be able to actually get this value from the URL. That is going to be important so that we can get the information of the laptop. So what we want to do is to do a application-wide configuration that will allow us to use an attribute to get that value from the URL. So let's come to app config. Here we have the configuration for our router. Let me put this in another line so that you can visualize everything better. And in here I will say with component input binding. And that's it. With this, we're going to be able to use a simple property in a class to get the value from the URL. Let's see that. Let's come to our new product edit component. And in here, I want to say ID number is going to be a number, of course. And we say this bang sign here because we know that it is going to be present. Let me say here input. We're going to use an input here. And let me say transform because I want to transform what is going to be by default a string into a number. So number attribute. And that's actually it. With this, I will have the ID in the URL here in this property. So let's test this. Let me say here products edit HTML. And in here, I will say the ID of the laptop is, and here I will say ID. All right, Ctrl+K+S to save everything. And let's come here. And let's see that if I click on here, we're going to see the ID of the laptop is 1. If I click back here or here, I can see that if I click on this one, the ID of the laptop is 2. So this is indeed working. Excellent. So now, let's think about what we want to do. I want to have here a form in which I want to project my already existing laptop so that we can edit it. Now, we already have a form, right? We already have this form. So what we can do is to actually create a component to reuse this form so that we don't have to work twice. So that we can reuse code, which is the smart thing to do sometimes. So let's do that. Alright, so let's come here. What I want to do now is that I want to create that component. So let me say ng generate component products dash form. Enter. Alright, so let me open the HTML, the TS, and the CSS, and let's get to work. First, because I always forget it, let me come to products create CSS. And let me take this from here because now we're going to have our form in the products form component. So products form component CSS and paste this here. And now let's come to the products create HTML, which we have here. I want to cut all of this because now this will be common code that we're going to place in our products form component. Let me paste this here. But instead of having this like this, create laptop, I want to have here a variable title because I want to be able to have it here, the text either create laptop or edit laptop. Alright, and of course you can see these many errors, but we can fix that right away. Let's come to the products create component TS. Let me cut this from here and let's come to the products form component because we're basically first going to be migrating the already existing functionality. So let me put this here, control dot, add all missing imports. So now we have this here, and now I want to come back to the products create component. So products create component, and I want to copy this, all of this, and then I will put it here in the products form component. So let's come here and let me paste this here. Now I don't need everything from here. I don't need this product service, nor the router, and I also don't need this from here. Alright, let me delete this. So now I can add all missing imports. And so if we come here to the HTML, let's see that we only have one error, which is the title. So let's fix that. Let's come here and let me put a input title. So let me say here title, a string, and let me say here input. This allows me to have an input in this component so that I can pass a different value from different clients of this component. So let me say here require true because this is a mandatory input, and let me say here control dot to import this from Angular core, as you can see here. Now as you can see, if we come back here, this is not indicating that we have an error. Now I have this products form component and I want to use it from our products create component. So when the user fills this form, they will click on save changes, and this will invoke this save changes function. And now I need to inform the parent component, the products create component, that a laptop is going to be created. So what I have to do is to add here an event. So let me say here output, and with this output I can allow this shell component to pass a message to the parent component. So let me say here form posted equal to new event emitter, and we're going to receive here a laptop creation, because that is what that form gives us. So now in here I can say, I already have this laptop here, so I can say this form posted emit, and then I can pass the laptop. Now I can react to this event in the parent component, take the laptop, and then send that laptop into the web API. Let's do that. Let's come here to products create, to the HTML, and I want to use my newly created products form component. So products form, control dot to make sure that we have imported this, and it seems like we already did. So as you can see, we have product form component here. Alright. So now let's say here, title. I want to pass a title, so I will say create laptop, and also I want to react to the event form posted. So let me say here save changes, and in save changes I want to pass event. This event is basically the value that I am passing into the emit function. The emit function that we just saw a minute ago here in product form component. Here, this laptop. That event is going to be equal to this laptop. Alright, so now what I have to do is to come to save changes. Let's come to the save changes function here, because I need to add the laptop here. So laptop of type laptop creation, and now we don't need this here anymore, and also we can clean this up. Let me remove this form from here. Let me also remove this form builder, and that's it. Alright, so now I want to make sure that everything works before we work with the edit form component. So let me Control K S everything, and let's say here, and let me say, for example, Toshiba 32 gigabytes RAM. Alright, save changes, and as you can see we have the Toshiba. Alright, so this is working, but now we have a reusable form here that we're going to reuse in our edit form component. So let's come to our products form component, because I need to be able to receive a already created laptop. Of course, because I need to be able to receive that laptop here and project that information into our form. So let me come here and say input. Now this input is not going to be required because, for example, when we are in creation mode, we don't have an already existing laptop. That is only for editing mode. So let me say here model undefined of type laptop. Alright, semicolon. And then what I want to do is that I want to use a lifecycle hook that will allow us to, when we get access into this information, I want to be able to check if it is undefined or not, and if it is not undefined, then we want to project that into the form. We're not going to be using the constructor because when the constructor is fired, we don't have access yet to this value. For that, we have to use implements on init, which is a lifecycle hook in Angular that allows us to execute a function when this component is being initialized, but especially after we have access to the values in the inputs. So that is why I have to use this on init. So let me say here, if this model is not undefined, then I want to say this form patch value, and I want to pass the model, this model actually. Alright, and that's it actually. So after that, I can come to the edit component, and what we're going to do here is that I want to use this ID. So since this is an input and I want to use it when we load this component, again we have to use implements on init. Control dot implement interface, and just as a matter of preference, I prefer to have it here. Now I need to use my product service to first get the laptop by its ID and also be able to update the laptop. So let me say here products service, and let's create those two functions. So public get by ID, ID number, and I will receive back an observable. It is going to be a single laptop, and then I will say return this HTTP get single laptop, and then I will say backtick this API URL / the ID. Alright, so I have here my API / laptop / 1 or 2 or 3, etc. And that corresponds to what we did here when we put this ID here in the URL. Alright, so now let me create the update function. So public update ID number and also the laptop creation. And then let me say here return this http put, and I want to pass here this API URL / ID, comma, the laptop that we want to update, semicolon here. Alright, with this, we're good to go from here. Let's come back to products, edit here, and let me say here, first I need to be able to say laptop of type laptop, and of course this can be undefined, because when we initialize this component, this is undefined because this will get a value after we execute this function. So let me say here that we need to have the product service. So let me say product service equal to inject products service, semicolon, and then let me say this product service get by ID, this ID, subscribe, we're going to receive a laptop, and we want to pass that laptop to our laptop property. So laptop equal to laptop. Alright, so now let's say here save changes for when the user posts the form. So let me say here laptop creation, and then I will say this product service update. I will pass the ID and also the laptop. Subscribe, and again, just like we did with creation, we're going to redirect the user to the products page. So let me say here router inject router semicolon control dot to import that, and let me say here this router navigate, and let me say here products semicolon here. Now let's use our component from here. Let's reuse our form. So here I will say app products form. Let me say here title edit laptop. I will pass the model, which is the laptop, and finally I will say form posted, and I will say here save changes, and I will pass event. And finally, before we render this component, I want to say if laptop. I only want to render this component if laptop is not undefined. So Ctrl K S to save everything, and let's come back here, and let's see that we have our list of laptops here. Let me edit the first one. As you can see, we have the name, or for example, I can say MSI, and as you can see, this is great. Now let me say, for example, 2 at the end, and as you can see, we have a 2 here. Or I can update this one, 64 gigabytes, for example, 64, save changes, and we have 64. Excellent. Now, finally, all that is left to do is to be able to delete a laptop. That is actually quite straightforward. We have to come here. I actually meant to come to Visual Studio Code. Let me say here product service, and let me say here public delete ID number, return this HTTP delete, and we're going to say here this API URL / ID semicolon here, and now we can come to the products list component, product list, and let me say here to the TS, I want to create a new function here. Let me say delete ID number. We're going to receive the ID of the laptop here. So let me say this product service delete ID subscribe, and then in here I want to reload my list of laptops. So what I will do is that I will create a new function here, load products. Then I just want to cut this from here, paste that here, and here I will say this load products so that we can reuse that functionality, and paste that here. Now I want to wire up this delete function into my delete button. So products list to the HTML, and here I want to say click event, delete, and I want to pass laptop ID as the parameter. And that's actually it. Ctrl K S to save everything. Let's come here, and for example, let me delete this Toshiba, and as you can see, it was deleted. So as you can see in this video, we have learned many things. We have configured several pages in our Angular application. We have installed and used Entity Framework Core to create our own database, and also did a CRUD with it, only using C# code. And here in Angular, we implemented a reactive form to be able to create and edit laptops. If you want to learn more about Angular and ASP.NET Core and building applications with these two technologies, buy my Udemy course today, in which I teach all of this from scratch, and in the end we have a whole application that we deploy into production. Link with the discount to this course in the description of this video. Thank you.